Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a compilation of 3 chilling, outdoors, deep in the woods, scary stories. Something that just didn't add up. Bad juju, all of that. Without further ado, let's get into the first story. Hope you guys enjoy it. The only thing I can think of that happened years ago. Years ago. This was back when it was okay to build permanent tree stands nailed into trees. I had scouted out a new area and settled on an area where an oak flat joined a big thick swamp. It was pretty open except one grove of head-high palmettos and brush that came from behind my stand and went into the swamp. I was able to climb into a fork of an oak tree by climbing a small dogwood next to it. After hoisting up my wood and nailing up a very stable platform and seat about 15 to 20 feet up, I dumped out some corn and left. This was in the summer, as I was on hog hunting. It was 2 weeks before I made it back to the hunt. Everything was fine as I walked in, before daylight, and I settled in. I noticed the corn was gone and lots of fresh hog sign that I could see by my small light. After everything got quieted back down, as I sat in the dark, I kept having that feeling of being watched. Now, I have hunted, camped, and grew up in the woods, and I am completely at home day or night in the darkest, deepest swamps, and never before had I felt this feeling. I wasn't scared because I didn't know to be. I just couldn't put my finger on it. The feeling never changed though, but I couldn't get used to it. I was just on edge, I guess. I never saw or heard any animals that morning that I can remember, till I was climbing down, that was, about mid-morning. I had lowered my rifle and was in the process of slithering from the oak to the little dogwood when I saw something out the corner of my eye. About the same time I heard it. I heard the crash and just barely caught sight of something running through the palmettos parallel to me. Now I say barely, because it looked like a huge, man sort of high, brown dog. Honestly, I thought buffalo instantly. How crazy is that? It crashed through the thicket and I heard it hit water. It sounded like a herd of hogs ploughing through. I had just wrote it off as deer that jumped, and I guess that me glimpsing it made it look different. Well, I'd thought about it, and that sight and that feeling I had all morning as I drove back home to do a little work before hunting again that evening. Around 2 or so that afternoon, I was again walking back into that stand, still thinking about the oddness of the morning. It was only a quarter mile or so walk, and I was there and settled in pretty quick. Again, everything was oddly silent. I had been sitting maybe an hour or so when I heard the faint splash of hogs, or so I assumed, across the thicket in the swamp. As it got louder, instead of that excited, eager feeling you would normally get, I was getting pretty nervous. It was so weird because I never felt that way before. Well, what I thought were a bunch of hogs turned out to be one single critter. When it was within 100 yards, I could hear it so plain and clear. Whatever it was in no hurry and stayed out of sight on my blind side across the thicket. I had scouted all of this out, and I knew the water that it was in was waist deep on me, and this thing was picking its feet or legs clear of the water as it walked. Seriously, I could hear the splash, drip, 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 splash, as it put one foot in front of the other, real slow, like it was trying to be quiet. I thought it might be another person till I thought about how deep that water was. I would never point a gun at a noise or anything I wasn't planning to kill dead. But as that noise got louder and got to the edge of the thicket, I was looking down the barrel. Still unsafe and finger on the trigger, but still, you got to know me to know how serious this must have been. I was actually shaking. Well, it got to the edge of the water within about 40 yards of the thicket before there was open ground between us. Then it crashed about 10 to 15 yards and then went quiet. Deathly quiet. I mean, no sound, no frogs, no crickets, no birds, no nothing. I might have imagined it, but I thought I could hear something every now and then, like it was slipping in on me. It was starting to get dark by then, and to say I was shaken would be an absolute understatement. I never saw or heard anything else that evening, but I walked out backwards right before dark. I was so put off by it, I had forgotten my bag, or as you might call a fanny pack today. I had put it hanging on a nail in the stand. I realised that while I was driving home. I told my granddaddy about it that night, and he of course made fun of me. If all that wasn't bad enough, here's the crazy part most folks don't believe. It was just 2 days later before I got the nerve to go back up there after my bag. I carried a shotgun this time, as I felt more secure with it, though I doubt I could have hit anything at this point. It was an old rabbit ear, and I kept my thumb on the hammer the whole walk in. And of course, I went in around midday. I kept my eyes peeled as I slipped in toward my stand. Like I said, it was pretty open except the thicket, which would be on the other side of my stand from where I was coming in. I got about 35 yards in or so from my stand and glanced up. It was gone. I don't remember seeing it peeled on the ground below, but it was not in the tree. All I could see was white all around where it had been, and where the bark had been scratched and clawed all to hell. And my bag was still hanging on the nail. I never looked back, and to this day I have not been back to that swamp. A few years after my little incident, it was all clear cut and part of that swamp was filled in. There are houses there now. I have told a few people about it, but I usually have to drink a few to talk about it. Only one person has believed me, but he won't tell me why. He also hunted the general area, and I think he might have had a run-in with something as well. I'm not asking anyone to believe this, I just thought I'd tell it. I have heard plenty more strange things around these parts, but I'll have to save them for another day. Sorry to be so long-winded, but you asked for it. Laugh out loud. When I was a boy, my parents used to take me and my older sister to relatives' house in eastern Kentucky, right around Letcher County. The closest city is Whitesburg. My uncle, who taught me everything I know about the outdoors, lived in a cabin nestled in a holler way back up in the mountains. His place was at the base of a big strip mine seamed up on the mountainside. As a boy, he and I used to go sit out on his back porch at night and use predator calls to try and call something down out of the hills. Well, one night, he and I were out there using one of his tapes. When we'd been out there for a good 2 hours or so and seen nothing, so we were thinking of calling it a night. We were about to pack everything up when he realised his squirrel feeder was empty. He then decided to go fill it back up with the seed. His feeder must have been, 50 yards away from his cabin on the mountainside and bordered by a tree line. He walked up the hillside about 25 yards when his wife came out to see why we were still outside. The only light out that night was the light from his porch. He was about 35 yards up the hill and he called back and said he forgot his flashlight, so his wife, my aunt, went back inside and got one of his spotlights. We had forgotten to turn off the tape with the predator calls on it, so I reached down to the tape player to turn it off, when I noticed my aunt was as stiff as a board. I hit the button off and looked up at her, and she had the spotlight shining straight up to the squirrel feeder where my uncle was at. I heard her say, "It's coming to you, Jim." Jim is my uncle's name. He turned back and goes, "Huh?" Then, a little louder this time, she goes, "It is coming straight towards you, Jim." That's when I looked up and I saw a set of eye shine about 15 feet away from where my uncle was standing and closing in. Whatever it was massive. The eyes were at least 5 to 6 feet off the ground. Also, whatever that creature was, it was completely and totally having the drop on my uncle, who was pretty much spent his whole life in the woods studying and tracking predators. Well, he was turned around looking at us with his back to those woods, so we told him to freeze. We all just kind of stood there for about 3 minutes, which seemed like a lifetime. It was dead silent. There were no crickets, no sounds of the night. It was the most eerie and creepy 3 minutes of my life. It just sat there at the tree line staring at us, and us staring right back at it. The brush at the tree line was thick, so we could not see what shape it was, just those eyes and where they were in relation to the ground. After those 3 minutes, my uncle slowly turned around to see what was about 15 feet away from him, with our spotlight on it. As he was about to turn and look at it directly in the eyes, it split, and for the next 15 minutes we could hear limbs cracking and snapping all the way up the side of the mountain as this animal decided to retreat. It's safe to say it scared the shit out of me and my uncle. Literally, my uncle shitted himself. I think that was the one thing that scared me the most about it, was that he was so damn scared. He was shaking, and I had never seen him like that. The other thing that scared both of us is that we had been sitting out there all night listening intently and watching that very tree line like hawks. Whatever animal or creature it was did not make a single sound coming down the side of that mountain. It never made a sound until it took off. It's safe to say I didn't sleep that night, and neither did my aunt or uncle. It's safe to say those gut feelings or something being wrong, being watched, or some unseen danger always freaks me out. But I did have a strong sense to get the hell out of Dodge one day while sitting by a little river, simply deciding on fishing or not. I had just got my pack off and found a spot to sit when I had that odd feeling of being watched from behind. I got up and moved downstream about 400 yards to a spot where there was a larger clearing between the river and the taller brush and trees. I did not see or hear anything while walking, only some old deer tracks in some dried mud. But when I got to looking at the spot to sit for a while, I got that feeling again. I could see pretty good all around me, about 100 to 175 yards, and just thought that I was being silly. I ate some food that I'd brought and watched the area around me as I tried to figure out which lure to use. For a while, the feeling went away. I fished for about an hour. No luck, and I needed to go piss. So I stood up and I walked back into the bush to take care of business. While standing there, that feeling came back stronger than before. All I could hear was my heart and my feet hitting the ground. No birds, no wind, no little critters of any kind. I finished and walked back to my spot. As I got there, I bent down to pick up my pole, and I heard my dad's voice call my name out loud and clear, using a tone of voice that meant I was to do what he told me to do. Do it now and ask no questions. The fucked up thing is my dad passed away 3 years before. Like others have said, instantly every cell of my body was all keyed up. The area I was in is known to have bears, mountain lions and wolves. We're just starting to make a comeback as well. This is southeast Washington, by the way. But I had not seen any sign or heard from anyone else that they had been in that area for a while. I grabbed my stuff and packed my bag as quick as I could. This time, I took my S&W 686P out of my pack that I brought as extra weight in the pack, and for snakes, and to put it on my hip. Normally, I don't like to open carry like this. As I put my pack on, that feeling of danger got even stronger. I started back to my truck the way I'd came in and froze solid after a few steps. I could not go back the way I'd came in. I stood there and listened and watched for about 10 minutes and heard nothing. The river was running slow, so it hardly made a sound. I looked all around me, and every time I looked back up the trail I came in, I got more and more nervous. The trail looped around back to my truck, but it was about a 2-mile walk versus a 3/4 mile the way that I came. So I went the long way back, and when I got to my truck, something had been there and scratched it up pretty good on the driver's side and tailgate. I don't have a clue what it could have been, because it was a designated parking spot that had just been re-gravelled. There were no scuff marks, there were no prints, and I could not find anything that looked like a print from a man or an animal. That feeling of danger did not go away until I had just driven up the road to the top of the ridge and was just about to back onto the pavement. When I did get to the T in the road, there was a game warden and sheriff deputy parked and talking there. They were kind of blocking the road as I pulled up, and they got out and walked over to my truck to talk to me. The conversation started normally. I told him I was fishing with no luck down at the river, so I had decided to come back, and when I mentioned my truck had gotten a little scratched up while parked, they got quiet. They lost their smiles, and then they looked at each other. They asked what time I'd parked and which way I went up or down the river, and if I'd noticed anything around the parking lot. I said I saw some scuff in the gravel, but nothing else. I did not say anything about the weird feelings. Again, they looked at each other and said, "Okay, have a nice day," and went on and moved their trucks off the road. This all happened between about 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in late May of 2005. I never went back. As I moved to Spokane at the end of June, I would have just thought I was being paranoid, being out there by myself. But the way those two cops acted made everything else feel even stranger. I'd like to go back someday, but I'm going to take a buddy along and maybe my shotgun. Wow. I hope you guys enjoyed those 3 very creepy, strange experiences out in the deep wild wilderness. Please do let me know down below in the comments. Please do like. Please do share. And as ever, folks, remember, be safe, not sorry.